My report doesn't begin with my arrival on scene. It starts colder, with the lines of a preliminary dossier dropped on my desk under the dim glow of a lamp back in Quantico. Dry facts, devoid of emotion, yet they sent an icy draft down my spine. Arizona. Highway 85, a desolate stretch between tiny Ajo and the Mexican border near Lukeville. Night, thick and impenetrable, the kind only the Sonoran Desert can pour over the land. Time, 1:47 local. Department of Energy, DOE, Convoy 7R was heading south. 3 armored Rhino-class trucks, standard escort of 2 jeeps with armed guards, the valuable cargo, 6 containers of IR-40 cobalt sources, classified as Category 3 radioactive materials. Not weapons-grade plutonium, but dangerous enough to warrant such precautions. The route was standard, vetted dozens of times. Communication with the DOE dispatch center in Phoenix was maintained every 15 minutes. At 1:45, everything was nominal. The voice of the security commander, calm and routine, reported passing checkpoint Bravo 6. 2 minutes later, the radio exploded into chaos. It didn't sound like a typical attack, no cartel ambush or robbery attempt. The first sounds cutting through the static weren't gunshots, but something else. A deep, ragged scraping, like giant claws raking across armor plating. Then screams. Not just fear, but primal terror, the kind you don't expect from hardened DO guards. Radio quality plummeted as if something was actively jamming the signal. Dispatchers in Phoenix frantically tried to re-establish contact. On the recording I listened to later, you can hear their desperate calls. 7 Rainer, respond! 7 Rainer, report status. The only reply was crackling static and torn fragments of phrases drowning in a howl that belonged neither to a siren nor the wind. The last intelligible words were screamed in a choked voice, later identified as the lead truck drivers. Center, they're everywhere. Too many legs. After that, silence. Complete, absolute silence on the airwaves. Simultaneously, all external surveillance cameras on the trucks went dark. The last recorded frame from a Rhino's rear-view camera showed something blurry, rapidly approaching from the darkness. Not a vehicle, not a person. Something low, multi-jointed, moving with unnatural speed. Attempts to contact the convoy continued through the night. Backup frequencies, satellite links. Nothing worked. The area around the convoy's last known coordinates became a radio dead zone. At dawn, a Border Patrol helicopter was dispatched. What the pilots saw choked the words in their throats. No signs of a conventional firefight. No shell casings, no blast craters. 3 armored trucks and 2 jeeps sat on the highway, but they looked like they'd been caught in the blast furnace of a plasma torch. The metal hulls weren't pierced, but melted. Cab windows had become murky, bubbling puddles of glass. The armor plating was buckled inward in places, as if subjected to incredible force and heat. The asphalt around the vehicles was blackened and blistered, like acid or molten metal had been poured on it. There were no people. Not living, not dead. Not a single drop of blood. Emptiness. But the most chilling discovery was the tracks. Deep gouges scarred the melting asphalt and the scorched sand of the shoulder. Not from tires, not from treads. Claw marks. Huge, thick as a finger, long as a human hand. They led directly to the mangled vehicles, crisscrossing, overlapping. It looked as if something monstrous had literally chewed through the metal. The cobalt sources were gone. The containers, each weighing nearly half a ton, had vanished without a trace. The official Border Patrol report read, "Unidentified incident with signs of hostile cargo seizure by unknown means." Unknown means. Too many legs. Melted armor. Giant claws. This cocktail of the impossible became my new case. the Convoy 7R case, and I didn't yet know that the black hole in the Arizona desert would pull me in far deeper than I could ever imagine. The FBI helicopter touched down on a makeshift landing zone beside Highway 85, kicking up clouds of superheated dust. The air outside shimmered with heat, and even through the closed windows, I could feel the desert's breath-dry scorching. I, Special Agent Dana Kincaid, stepped onto Arizona soil and was immediately hit by a wave of almost unbearable heat. My experience as a military criminalist in Afghanistan taught me to work in extreme conditions, but this felt different. Not just heat, but a heavy, oppressive atmosphere. The scene was cordoned off with border patrol tape. Soldiers in camo and wide-brimmed hats stood perimeter, their faces tense. I was met by a short man of Hispanic descent, dressed in a light shirt and slacks, clearly not regulation attire. Dr. Leo Alvarez, a radiologist from the Department of Energy. He'd been sent to assess the radiation situation. He had an intelligent, attentive face, but his eyes held a hidden anxiety unusual for a scientist at an emergency site. He offered his hand. The handshake was firm, but his palm was slightly damp. "Agent Kincaid," I introduced myself. "Dr. Alvarez," he nodded. "Glad you're here, though the circumstances..." He trailed off, but I understood. Nobody was glad to be here. We approached the mangled vehicles. The sight was even more shocking up close than in the dossier photos. The armored rhinos looked like giant candles melted by some hellish fire. Metal had dripped in frozen waves, forming bizarre stalactites. The holes torn in the armor were ragged, jagged, as if chewed rather than pierced. I walked around one of the trucks. The cab's interior was burned beyond recognition. The dashboard was a shapeless mass of fused plastic and metal. But the strangest thing was the smell. Not the typical scent of burnt fuel or gunpowder. It smelled of ozone, like after a heavy thunderstorm, and something else faint, metallic, and organic. Leo methodically swept the perimeter with a Geiger counter. The device remained silent. Only background radiation, normal for the area. "No signs of elevated radiation, Agent Kincaid," he reported, approaching me. His voice sounded bewildered. 6 containers of cobalt-60 vanished, but there's no leak. It's impossible. Even if the containers were simply dragged away, there should be some trace left. And this temperature, to melt steel like this, you need temperatures around 1500 degrees Celsius. But where did it come from? And why is there no residual radiation? I crouched down at the edge of the melted asphalt where the loose desert sand began. My eyes caught something shiny. Small, irregularly shaped beads of black glass were scattered across the ground. They looked like obsidian, but lighter and more porous. I picked one up with tweezers from my forensics kit. The bead felt warm to the touch. "What is this?" I asked, showing the find to Leo. He took the bead, examining it closely through a portable microscope. "Fulgurites," he said quietly. "It's quartz sand, fused by extremely high temperature. Usually happens after a lightning strike. But there was no storm here, and lightning doesn't melt armored trucks from the inside out." He rubbed some sand between his fingers near the claw marks. "And look here." I leaned closer. Amidst the deep gouges from the claws, other distinct impressions were visible. Footprints, resembling human feet, but somehow wrong. Too wide, with unnaturally long toes. And they were intermingled with the claw marks, sometimes even overlapping, as if belonging to the same creature capable of changing its stance. Or as if different creatures were active here, walking in each other's tracks. "Barefoot prints," I murmured. "Next to this." My finger hovered over a deep claw gouge. Leo nodded, his expression growing darker. Exactly. Human tracks in the tracks of something else. In the same place. On sand that was turned to glass by the heat. He looked up from the ground, meeting my eyes. Agent Kincaid. I grew up not far from here on the Tohono O'odham Reservation. The elders told legends about creatures that walk the desert at night. Creatures you're better off not meeting. I could see the effort it cost him to say it. A scientist, a radiologist, forced to recall childhood boogeyman stories in the face of inexplicable facts. I always relied on facts. But the facts here screamed of the impossible. Black glass, mixed tracks, melted metal with no radiation. Whatever attacked Convoy 7R didn't fit into any known threat category. We set up a temporary command post a couple of miles from the scene in an old abandoned motel off the highway. There wasn't much choice. Moving equipment any closer was useless. The radio dead zone proved stable and sharply defined, a radius of roughly 2 miles around the mangled trucks. Any electronics more complex than a flashlight died inside that circle. Radios, satellite phones, GPS navigators, even simple digital watches all became useless junk. Our FBI tech support agents wrestled for hours, trying to punch through the interference or at least understand its nature, but failed. The signal wasn't just being jammed, it vanished, absorbed by something, as if space itself was warped in this zone, creating a localized black hole for radio waves. I stood at the window of our makeshift HQ, staring out at the desert baked under the relentless midday sun. Heat haze shimmered off the ground, distorting the outlines of distant saguaros. That's when I noticed it. The shadow cast by the motel's flagpole. It was doubled. Not just blurry at the edges, but 2 distinct, almost parallel shadows, offset from each other by a few inches. I rubbed my eyes, blaming fatigue and the heat. But then I looked at the shadow of our van. Same thing. 2 shadows. I stepped outside. The shadow of my own figure doubled too. It was faint but undeniable, as if there wasn't one sun overhead, but 2 sources of light positioned very close together. Or as if reality here had slightly split. I called Leo over. He stepped out into the sun, squinted, looked at his shadow, then mine. Recognition dawned on his face, mixed with something else, like fear. "Double shadows," he whispered. "The elders said that happens in places where the veil between worlds grows thin, where spirits walk alongside the living." I remained silent. Trying to explain it with spatial polarization from unknown radiation or some other scientific hypothesis felt inappropriate right then, almost sacrilegious. The fact remained. Something was happening here that violated the familiar laws of physics. Later that day, a border patrol unit joined us. Major Quinn Borden, a tough, weathered man with sharp, assessing eyes, was personally overseeing the cordon. He was angry and confused. His men were sweeping the surrounding area but finding nothing besides the strange tracks and those damned glass beads. Borden was a man of action, a veteran of border skirmishes with the cartels, and all this weirdness was getting under his skin. "My men questioned the locals," he grunted, handing me a thin folder with reports. "The Indians from the Tohono O'odham Reservation. They're spooked, talking about Itoihuhu'ula, the night wolf, an ancient desert spirit. They keep saying the same thing. The night wolf steals metal to build its skin. Crazy talk. Crazy talk, maybe. But the phrase snagged my attention. Steals metal. The missing cobalt sources. The melted trucks as if something had been drained or leached from them. Could there be a connection? I glanced at Leo. He stood slightly apart, his gaze shifting between Borden's reports and the desert horizon. It was clear the words about the night wolf had struck a deep chord within him, connected to his roots, the lore of his people. Legends often have a basis in reality, Major, Leo said quietly, not looking at Borden. Sometimes they describe phenomena for which we simply lack the scientific terms. Borden snorted but said nothing more. He had seen the double shadows too. He had felt the oppressive radio silence. That night, sleep wouldn't come. The desert silence pressed in on my ears. Occasionally, the distant howl of coyotes drifted by, but it sounded somehow muffled, nervous. I replayed the facts in my head, over and over. The dead zone, double shadows, melted metal, fulgurates, mixed tracks, missing cobalt, legends of the night wolf stealing metal. Nothing fit into a logical picture. It felt like a jigsaw puzzle whose pieces came from different boxes. But there had to be a key somewhere, something to link all these anomalies. And my gut told me the answer lay neither in physics nor folklore, but somewhere in between, in something far more terrifying and man-made. Back in the makeshift HQ, I received an encrypted message from Quantico, a request for additional information tied to the unusual aspects of Case 7R, had passed through several clearance levels and unearthed something unexpected. I was granted access to an ultra-classified Department of Defense archive. Files stamped, top secret, eyes only, Project Fenrir. What I read there made the hair on my neck stand up. This wasn't the ravings of a mad scientist. These were official reports, experiment logs, memoranda, the dry, bureaucratic chronicle of a monstrous undertaking. Project Fenrir launched 7 years ago under DARPA, later transferring to a shadowy Office of Special Programs, reporting directly to a select few in the Pentagon. The project's goal sounded ambitious and terrifying: create the soldier of the future, capable of operating in extreme radioactive contamination, withstanding colossal damage, and possessing superhuman strength and endurance. The chosen tool, a gene engineering virus based on CRISPR-Cas9 technology, modified for integration into adult human DNA. The virus was designed to rewrite key sections of the genome responsible for tissue regeneration, radiation resistance, and muscle strength. The initial reports were full of optimism. Lab tests on animals showed astonishing results. Test rats survived lethal doses of radiation. Wounds on their bodies healed in minutes. Then began the human trials. Volunteers from Special Operations Forces, primarily Rangers and Navy SEALs. They were administered the virus under strict medical supervision. At first, everything went according to plan. The soldiers' physical capabilities skyrocketed. They became stronger, faster, their pain thresholds increased dramatically. Regeneration truly worked. Minor wounds closed before their eyes. But then the side effects emerged. The first alarm bell was heightened aggression in the subjects, bursts of uncontrollable rage. Then came psychological problems, paranoia, auditory and visual hallucinations. And then what the reports euphemistically termed lycanthropic instability. It turned out the virus interacted with hormonal balances and lunar phases. During periods of the full moon, especially combined with additional stressors, high adrenaline levels, physical exhaustion, the virus triggered uncontrolled mutation. The soldiers lost their human form, transforming into something beast-like. Reports described accelerated bone and muscle growth, altered skeletal structure, the appearance of claws, increased body hair, deformation of the skull. The most terrifying aspect was that the transformed soldiers lost not only their appearance but also their reason. They formed aggressive packs, obeying primitive instincts and the strongest alpha. They displayed animal cunning and unbelievable brutality. Several incidents at classified test sites ended with personnel fatalities. The project teetered on the brink of shutdown. Listed as the head of Project Fenrir throughout was Colonel Abram Knox. Judging by his memos, Knox was fanatically devoted to the idea of the super soldier and, until the very end, tried to stabilize the virus, convincing his superiors he was on the verge of a breakthrough. He saw these creatures not as monsters, but as the next step in the evolution of special forces. And then, about a year ago, the reports on Project Fenrir abruptly cease. The last entries mentioned the transfer of a key group of test subjects and the main research center to a new classified facility somewhere in the southwestern U.S. The subsequent fate of the project and its participants was unknown. Until today. I sat there staring at the laptop screen and the mosaic began to form. Giant claws, inhuman strength capable of tearing through armor, mixed tracks of man and beast, the radio dead zone perhaps a side effect of the virus or related technology, the extreme heat melting metal, a result of furious metabolism or something else, and the missing cobalt, radioactive sources. Maybe the virus didn't just grant radiation resistance, but somehow used it, or the creatures themselves needed it. The Tohono O'odham legend of the night wolf stealing metal. Could it refer not just to any metal, but radioactive material? Colonel Knox, who lost control of his pets a year ago, could he be involved in the current events? Was he trying to recover his creation, or cover his tracks? The questions multiplied, but now they had a name. The name of the ancient mythical wolf, devourer of gods, Fenrir. And its tracks led directly here, into the scorched Arizona desert. The Project Fenrir files contained coordinates for the last known location of the research center, an abandoned Cold War-era test site, deep in the desert, far from roads and civilization. A place perfectly suited for hiding something dangerous and secret. Leo, myself, and a small support team from an FBI tactical unit flew out there by helicopter. From the air, the site looked like a scar on the desert's face. Several crumbling concrete bunkers, rusted towers, and perimeters tangled with barbed wire. But one bunker stood out. It looked newer, and fresh tracks from heavy machinery led up to it. We landed at a safe distance. The air here was just as heavy and still. The silence pressed down. Approaching the bunker, we found the massive steel gates torn from their hinges and mangled as if blown outward from within. Claw marks scarred the metal everywhere. Inside, semi-darkness reigned, along with the stench of death, an acrid, nauseating cocktail of decomposition, chemicals, and something else, metallic and burnt. A flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing a laboratory. Tables were covered with smashed equipment, shelves of test tubes overturned, papers scattered. But the worst was in the center of the room. A huge cage, more like a pen, constructed from thick steel bars of the type used to contain large predators. Inside the cage were people, or what was left of them. Several bodies in white lab coats. They weren't simply killed. Their bodies were literally woven into the bars, as if someone or something with monstrous strength had crushed them between the steel rods, splintering bone and tearing flesh. The scene was so grotesque and horrifying that even the hardened operators from the tactical team let out choked curses. I felt nausea rise in my throat, but forced myself to look, to register the details. This wasn't the work of a human, nor any ordinary animal. We began a methodical sweep of the bunker's rooms. In one of the side rooms, bolted shut from the inside with a heavy bar, we found her. A young woman, barely more than a girl, in torn army fatigues. She sat on the floor, hugging her knees, shaking uncontrollably. Her eyes were wide with terror, but a flicker of sanity still burned within them. This was Corporal Sophie Ryder. Her name was on the list of Project Fenrir test subjects. But she was not entirely human. One of her arms was slightly longer than the other, covered in sparse, coarse hair, and the nails on her fingers had become short, sharp claws. Her facial features were also slightly distorted, sharpened. She was partially transformed, as if the mutation process had stalled halfway. At first she didn't respond to us, just mumbled incoherently. Leo, using his experience with traumatized individuals, and perhaps drawing on something from his people's knowledge of wounds to the spirit, managed to gradually establish contact. She could barely speak, her voice breaking into a hoarse whisper, but she managed to write a few phrases on a notepad I gave her. Her story, supplemented by our findings in the lab, painted a picture of catastrophe. Sergeant Garrett Lowry, callsign Mongoose, was one of the first and most successful test subjects. A decorated Ranger hero, awarded for bravery in multiple operations. He tolerated the virus better than others, had almost learned to control the transformation. He became the informal leader, the alpha for the other infected soldiers. But something went wrong. Perhaps another experiment, or a shift in the lunar cycle. Lowry lost control. He ripped off his block control injector, a device meant to suppress the mutation, and triggered a chain reaction among the others. A pack of maddened werewolves broke free, unleashing a massacre in the lab. The scientists were their first victims. Sophie survived by sheer luck. Buried under falling equipment in a supply closet, she managed to bolt the door. The most shocking part of her account involved Colonel Knox. According to her, Knox knew about the breach almost immediately. But instead of raising the alarm and initiating a nationwide manhunt, he ordered the incident classified. He didn't want to admit his project's failure. He hoped he could track down and recapture the escaped pack himself quietly without attracting attention. He covered up the escape of his monsters, releasing them into the world. For a year they hid somewhere in the desert, perhaps hibernating or mutating further. And the recent incident with Convoy 7R was likely their first major public reappearance. They had come out to hunt, but they weren't hunting people. They were hunting metal. Radioactive sources. Why? Sophie didn't know. She only knew one thing. Lowry, Mongoose, was their alpha, and he was leading them, where remained a mystery. But now we had a trail, and an enemy's name, or rather, names, Lowry and Knox, one a monster by circumstance, the other a monster by choice. Corporal Ryder was in bad shape, both physically and mentally. Her partially transformed body fought the virus. Fever alternated with chills, moments of lucidity with bouts of panic and aggression. We evacuated her to the temporary base under heavy guard and medical observation. Leo spent a lot of time with her, trying not only to gather information, but also to somehow ease her suffering. Thanks to his patience and the fragmented data we managed to salvage from the surviving records in the Fenrir lab, the mechanism of the transformation began to come into focus. This wasn't magic or a curse in the mystical sense. It was biochemistry pushed to a nightmarish extreme. The Fenrir virus didn't just rewrite DNA. It created a complex bioreactor within the host's body. The key components for triggering uncontrolled mutation were three factors, cynically dubbed Fenrir's Trinity by the project scientists. 1. Radiation index. The virus didn't just make the host resistant to radiation, it used it as a catalyst. A certain level of external gamma or neutron radiation or accumulated internal dose acted as a kind of trigger, preparing the cells for transformation. This explained the pack's interest in the cobalt sources. They needed them not as weapons, but as fuel or a stimulant. 2. Adrenaline spike. Intense stress, fear, rage, pain. Any surge of adrenaline into the bloodstream initiated a cascade of hormonal reactions that interacted with viral proteins. In combat or during a hunt, the virus carrier became far more susceptible to transformation. 3. Lunar phase, the strangest and least understood factor. Fenrir scientists hypothesized that the moon's gravitational pull or changes in the body's melatonin levels linked to the lunar cycle somehow affected the stability of the viral RNA. During the full moon, the barriers restraining the mutation weakened. When all three factors converged, high radiation levels, an adrenaline surge, and the full moon detonation occurred. The virus spun out of control, launching an avalanche of bodily restructuring. Cells began dividing at monstrous speed. Bones broke and reset along new lines. Muscle mass built up in seconds. Body temperature spiked dramatically, causing the melting effect upon contact with certain materials and explaining the thermal signature satellites might detect. The host's heart became a detonator, setting off a chain reaction of terror. Sophie Ryder, trapped in her semi-transformed state, was living proof of the process's instability. Perhaps the dose of the virus she received was smaller, or her body reacted differently. She also confirmed what the old legends hinted at and what we suspected: silver. But again, there was no mysticism involved. Leo, studying fragments of Fenrir's biochemical reports, found the explanation. The virus created unique protein structures within the host's cells, using disulfide bridges, sulfur compounds, to maintain its stability and accelerated regeneration. Silver, especially in ionized form, has a high affinity for sulfur. It broke these sulfur bridges, destabilizing the viral proteins and slowing the mutation and regeneration processes. It's like throwing sand in the gears of a complex machine, Leo explained, pointing to formulas on his tablet screen. Silver doesn't destroy the virus completely, but it disrupts its function, slows the transformation, makes regeneration less effective, causes intense pain in the host. This gave us some kind of weapon against these creatures. Not a panacea, but a chance. A chance to slow them, wound them, perhaps even stop them. But Sophie added a grim detail: the virus adapted. With each transformation, each exposure, it could become more resistant. And Lowry, as Werewolf #001, having endured the most cycles, was likely the most resilient of them all. The information was invaluable, but also terrifying. We weren't just dealing with a pack of monsters, but with a product of high technology run amok. A biological weapon that chose its own targets and adapted to neutralization attempts. And somewhere out there in the desert, under the full moon, this pack was gathering strength, fueled by stolen radiation, preparing for a new hunt. And the heart of each one ticked like the timer on a bomb, ready to explode on the command of Fenrir's Trinity. The next trail led us to Quito Canyon, a small oasis with natural springs near the Mexican border, a sacred place for the Tohono O'odham people. Word came from Borden's patrol. His men had stumbled upon a grim discovery. Leo and I arrived as evening fell, the setting sun painting the canyon cliffs in shades of blood red. The air was still, and the silence felt unnatural for a place usually teeming with desert life. The discovery was a shallow, dried-up wash, its bottom littered with animal remains. Dozens of coyotes. Their bodies had been torn apart with incredible brutality. Bones were gnawed clean, skulls crushed. This wasn't the work of normal predator conflict over territory. This was a slaughter, a total extermination of competitors. Laurie's pack was clearly asserting its dominance in this part of the desert, and the local predators were the first to feel their fury. Leo crouched by the edge of the wash, his face grim. "Coyotes are smart, cautious animals," he said quietly. "They wouldn't engage an enemy so vastly superior in strength, which means they were caught completely off guard, or They didn't perceive the threat seriously until it was too late. But the most disturbing find awaited us on the canyon walls. Someone had carved symbols into the smooth sandstone surface. It was a strange mix of runic-like characters, similar to some I'd seen in the Project Fenrir files, likely some internal project marking or symbology, and crudely formed Latin letters. They formed a repeating phrase, Vita Lupi Vita. Wolf's life is life. Or the wolf life is the life. A primitive but chilling declaration of a new identity. They no longer considered themselves human. They had embraced their bestial nature, creating their own, albeit rudimentary, ideology. While I photographed the inscriptions and collected samples of sand and bone fragments for analysis, Leo walked off to the side near the canyon rim where the wind eddied between the rocks. He stood motionless, listening intently. After a moment, he gestured for me to come over. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. I strained my ears. At first, I heard nothing but the sighing wind, but then I caught it. A low, drawn-out howl drifting from somewhere far off, from the Mexican side of the border. It resembled a coyote's call, but there was something more to it. Deeper, guttural notes that sent a chill crawling up my spine. It held not only wild loneliness, but also an intelligent, cold menace. Leo pulled a portable spectrograph, a device for analyzing sound frequencies, from his pack. He aimed the microphone towards the sound source and started recording. A complex waveform appeared on the small screen. Leo zoomed in, analyzing the peaks and valleys. "Look," he showed me the screen. "These are the characteristic formants for Canis latrans, the common coyote. But these lower and with a different modulation, they're closer to a human voice, a scream or a growl. But they're simultaneous, intertwined." The spectrograph visually confirmed what our ears told us. It was a hybrid sound, the howl of a creature that was both beast and human at the same time. The howl repeated, closer this time, and it was joined by another, then another. A whole chorus of unearthly voices poured over the desert, echoing off the canyon walls. The sound was so eerie and unnatural that even the operators from our tactical support team shifted uneasily and checked their weapons. There was nothing of familiar wildlife in that chorus. It was the call of the Fenrir pack. They were somewhere nearby, and they knew we were here. The Tohono O'odham legend was coming alive before our eyes, but this was no spirit tale. This was a reality forged by human hands in a secret laboratory. A reality that now howled at us from the darkness with the voice of a half-man, half-beast. Vita Lupi Vita. The wolf life had begun, and it demanded sacrifices. The coyotes were only the beginning. Analysis of intercepted radio communications and satellite surveillance data provided our next lead, and it was alarming. Laurie's pack was moving purposefully south, towards the Mexican border, near the town of Sonoita. It was a known hub for smugglers and drug cartels. My contacts at the DEA confirmed. Activity in that border sector had spiked sharply. It seemed Laurie wasn't just leading his pack on the run. He had a plan. The decryption of one intercept, captured on frequencies used by the Los Zorros, the Fox's cartel, shed light on that plan. A voice with a distinct regional accent, presumably belonging to a cartel lieutenant, discussed a deal with American friends. The conversation involved providing sanctuary and safe passage through one of their tunnels under the border. In exchange, the friends would assist with a special shipment. Details were murky, but the mention of hot containers and the need to get them through the tunnel fast before it lights up left little doubt. Laurie was offering the cartel his services or his packs as a unique means of transport for weapons or drugs, possibly using the stolen cobalt sources as a way to mask the cargo from scanners, an energy source for something, or simply as payment for passage. The motives remained unclear, but the very notion of a deal between genetically engineered werewolves and a Mexican drug cartel was absurd and lethally dangerous. I reported the intel to HQ. The response was swift but unexpected. Instead of ordering an immediate assault or coordination with Mexican authorities, I received a directive from the highest levels signed by Colonel Abram Knox. He somehow still wielded influence and had access to operational intelligence. The order was brief and unambiguous. Approach by any unauthorized personnel to Fenrir objects or related assets is to be prevented by any means necessary. Any witnesses to incidents related to the project are subject to immediate and final liquidation. Information leaks are unacceptable. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. Unauthorized personnel. Assets. Witnesses. Knox wasn't planning on capturing his monsters. He was planning on burying the evidence. Lori's pack was an asset. The Los Zorros cartel, having witnessed their existence, were slated for liquidation. And we, myself, Leo, my team members, even Major Borden's patrolmen, we were witnesses too. Knox's order effectively painted targets on our backs. He was prepared to bury everyone, werewolves, cartel, federal agents, just to keep Project Fenrir secret. The situation changed instantly. We now had two enemies. Lori's pack moving toward the border with radioactive cargo and unpredictable intentions, and Colonel Knox with his shadow team of liquidators, who were likely already somewhere nearby, ready to strike from the darkness. Major Borden, whom I cautiously hinted might involve a third party, reacted predictably. His obsession to clean up the border intensified tenfold. He saw this as a chance to eliminate both the cartel and these freaks, as he called Lori's pack, in one go. He increased patrols, put his men on high alert. But I knew his soldiers, armed with standard weapons, would be powerless against the werewolves. And they certainly couldn't stand against Knox's highly trained killers. We were caught between a rock and a hard place. Lori and his pack were dangerous, but they were victims of an experiment, creatures fighting for survival, albeit through monstrous means. Knox represented a cold, calculating threat, willing to destroy innocents to preserve a secret. My internal moral compass spun erratically. Who was the greater evil? And how could I operate when an order from my own command effectively declared open season on me? Time was running out. The pack was nearing Sonoida. The cartel was preparing for the deal. And somewhere in the shadows, Colonel Knox was giving his final orders to his executioners. The border was about to ignite. The coming night promised to be hell. The full moon was set to rise over the desert, pushing Fenrir's trinity to its peak. Lori's pack was somewhere near the border, preparing to cross through the cartel tunnel. Knox's team, unseen and lethal, was undoubtedly already taking up positions. And we, a handful of FBI agents, a DOE radiologist, and a few of Borden's men whom I'd decided to trust with part of the truth, were caught in the epicenter of the impending storm. We needed weapons. Weapons capable of at least slowing the werewolves down. Silver. The information from Sophie Ryder confirmed by Leo was our only chance. But where could we get enough silver and weaponize it effectively under field conditions? The solution came unexpectedly. Leo remembered old DOE stockpiles at a mothballed storage facility nearby, anti-radiation dispersal rounds for special grenade launchers. These rounds were designed to spray fine chemical agents to bind radioactive particles. The casings were standard, but the payload, we cracked open several crates. Instead of chemicals, we filled the shell casings with every scrap of silver we could find. confiscated smugglers' silver bars, silverware from the abandoned motel, even a few old silver dollars Leo carried as keepsakes. We ground it all into coarse shot, mixing it with a small amount of magnesium powder to enhance the thermal effect on impact. It was improvised, desperate weaponry, but better than nothing. We loaded a few rifles with cartridges containing homemade silver slugs cast from the same bars. By evening, the sky clouded over. A strong wind kicked up, carrying clouds of sand. A sandstorm, a haboob as the locals call it, was rolling in. Visibility dropped to a few meters. Radio communication, already unreliable in this zone, became nearly impossible. We were cut off from the outside world, trapped in a roaring cauldron of sand and wind. Perfect conditions for a hunt and for an ambush. We moved towards the suspected location of the Cartel tunnel entrance, an abandoned mine south of Quito Baquito. Borden and his men led the way, trying to navigate by GPS, which worked only intermittently. Leo, my small team, and I followed, peering into the sandy gloom. The wind howled so loudly it drowned out almost all other sounds, except one, the clicking of Leo's dosimeter. The device had come alive, the readings climbing slowly but steadily. We were approaching the radiation source, approaching Lowry and his cargo, and then we saw them. They emerged from the sand shroud like ghosts, not wolves on 4 legs, figures standing nearly upright on powerful legs bent at the knee. Taller than a man, with elongated muzzles filled with sharp teeth and long arms ending in black claws. Their bodies were covered in sparse, patchy fur, some of it looking scorched, as if they'd walked through fire. But the most terrifying thing, they glowed. Faintly, but noticeably in the sandy twilight. A weak, bluish luminescence emanated from their bodies, especially from their chests and limbs, as if the radiation they absorbed was leaking out, making them living, walking sources of gamma radiation. The double shadows I'd seen earlier now made sense. It was the creature's own glow creating a second contour alongside the shadow cast by the moon filtering through the clouds. They moved quickly and silently despite their size. There were many of them. 10, 12 figures forming a semicircle around us. Leading them was the largest, his eyes burning red in the darkness. Lowry. Mongoose. He threw back his head and let out the same hybrid howl we'd heard in the canyon, a blood-curdling sound that cut through even the roar of the storm. It was the signal to attack. The pack charged us out of the swirling sand. The reports of our rifles were swallowed by the wind and the monster's snarls. A rain of silver fell upon the desert. The battle for the border had begun. The fight in the heart of the sandstorm was a chaos of flesh, sand, and fire. The werewolf figures materialized from the roaring gloom, attacked with berserker fury, then dissolved back into the sandy curtain. Their movements were inhumanly fast, their reflexes primal. Standard bullets only momentarily staggered them, leaving shallow wounds that closed visibly with a sickening hiss. But the silver worked differently. When the slugs and shot from our makeshift rounds struck home, they produced a horrific effect. The monster's skin didn't just tear at the impact point. It blackened and smoldered, as if touched by acid. This was the reverse burn Leo had described, the destruction of the sulfur bridges in their tissues. The werewolves howled in agony, their movements slowing. Some collapsed, writhing in the sand, their glowing bodies flaring brighter in torment. But regeneration, though slowed, still functioned. After several agonizing seconds, the smoldering wounds began to knit shut, covered by a network of dark, scar-like veins. They rose again, even more furious, and lunged back into the fray. We took losses. 2 of Borden's men were torn apart before they could react. Another operator from my team suffered deep claw wounds to the chest. I fired my assault rifle, loaded with silver rounds, aiming for limbs, center mass, anywhere to stop them. Beside me, Leo reloaded the special grenade launcher with silver shot. He operated with focused intensity, his scientific mind trying to analyze even in this hell. He shouted corrections to me. "Aim lower. Their center of mass is shifted. Silver's effective, but we need larger caliber for shock effect." Suddenly, one of the werewolves, flanking our defensive line, charged directly at me. I didn't have time to raise my rifle. A massive clawed hand lashed out towards my face. I saw its gaping maw filled with fangs, felt its hot, fetid breath. Then Leo was there between me and the monster. He shoved me aside, taking the blow himself. The werewolf's claws ripped through his shoulder and side, leaving deep, ragged wounds. Leo cried out in pain and crumpled to the sand. I fired point blank at the attacking beast. The silver slug slammed into its chest. It staggered, howled, black smoke pouring from the wound, and collapsed, dead. I scrambled over to Leo. Blood soaked rapidly through his shirt. But worse was the change happening around the wounds. The skin was taking on an unhealthy grayish hue. His breathing grew shallow, his eyes rolled back. His entire body began to tremble violently. The virus. Infection had entered his bloodstream through the creature's claws. He was infected. The transformation was beginning. "Leo, hang on!" I yelled, trying to apply pressure to the wounds. But he barely responded. His body convulsed, his features twisting. He growled, a low, guttural sound that chilled my blood. Yet even in the agony of the approaching transformation, his scientist's mind kept working. He grabbed my hand, his gaze clearing for a fraction of a second. My case, he rasped. I found his field kit with reagents and instruments. With trembling fingers, he pointed to several ampules in his tablet, the screen still glowing with formulas and notes he'd made after studying the Fenrir data. Cerium, chlorides, inject, unstable. But he couldn't speak further, another convulsion racking his body. I understood. He had found a potential antidote. Or rather, not an antidote, but a virus, burnout. Cerium chlorides, a rare earth metal used in some radiation technologies. Leo had theorized that a high concentration of these salts might trigger a cascade reaction that would literally burn the viral RNA and proteins, halting the mutation. But the cost was high. The formula was unstable. The reaction could kill the host or cause irreversible damage. His notes were marked high-risk kidney failure, tissue necrosis. It was a desperate gamble, a chance to remain human at the cost of part of himself. The battle raged around us. The sandstorm howled. The moon shone through breaks in the clouds, bathing the battlefield in ghostly light. Leo writhed on the sand, on the verge of becoming one of them. I had a choice. Try to administer the unstable antidote, or... I looked at the syringe in my hand, then at Leo's face, contorted by pain and mutation. The choice was obvious. The fighting subsided. The depleted werewolf pack, having suffered losses from the silver, and recognizing the futility of a frontal assault on our fortified position near the mine entrance, retreated, melting back into the sandstorm. They hadn't gone far. Their vicious snarls and faint blue glow could still be felt nearby in the darkness. We had taken casualties, but we were holding. Leo was unconscious, but the cerium injection seemed to have halted the transformation, plunging him into a deep, feverish state. His breathing was steady, but the skin around his wounds had blackened. The antidote had begun its dangerous work. I knew we had little time. The pack could regroup and attack again. The Cartel might initiate their operation in the tunnel, and Knox's team could strike at any moment. We needed to think outside the box. I made a decision that violated every instruction and protocol. I decided to talk to Laurie. Leaving Major Borden in command of the defense, I took the wideband encrypted radio we'd salvaged from one of the DOE trucks and moved slightly forward towards the direction the werewolves had retreated. Switching the radio to an open frequency, I broadcast. Sergeant Garrett Laurie, Mongoose. I know who you are. I know about Project Fenrir. This is FBI Special Agent Dana Kincaid. I'm proposing negotiations. For several long minutes, the only reply was the howl of the wind in my headset. I was beginning to think it was useless, that the beast had completely consumed him. But then the speaker crackled, and I heard a voice. Hoarse, distorted, like it was being dragged over gravel, but it was a human voice, not a snarl. What do you want, FBI? Laurie, this madness has to stop, I said, forcing firmness and confidence into my voice. You're leading your people to their deaths. The cartel will betray you the moment they get what they need, and there's another group hunting you. Knox's people. They'll kill all of you and everyone who's seen you, including us, to bury the secret of Fenrir. Silence again. Then a heavy sigh that carried the weight of pain and exhaustion. Knox, that bastard, he promised us a cure. Control. He lied to you then, and he's lying now. I pressed. I can help. I have proof of Project Fenrir's existence. Enough to blow this whole thing wide open. I'm offering you a deal. You and your pack walk away. Disappear into the desert, the mountains, anywhere. Leave the cobalt here. In return, I won't release the Fenrir files now. I'll give you a chance to get away. But if you continue killing, if you cross that border, I will unleash hell on you. Not just Knox, but the government, the press. You'll be hunted down like trophies all over the world. The choice is yours, Laurie. Is any part of that sergeant, the ranger hero, still in there? Or is it just the mongoose? I could see him, a dark, massive figure standing on the crest of a dune about 100 yards away. He didn't move, seemingly weighing my words. The human part of him was still alive. It was fighting the beast, the instincts, the pain and rage. I saw his hesitation. Maybe there was a chance. And at that moment, the ground shuddered. A deafening roar ripped through the desert, drowning out even the wind's howl. From the direction of the abandoned mine, where the cartel tunnel entrance was located, a column of fire and smoke erupted into the sky. The explosion was so powerful, it nearly knocked us off our feet with the shockwave. Knox. It could only be him. He hadn't waited for the outcome of our negotiations. He had decided to end it all with one swift blow. The cartel, the smuggling operation, the tunnel that could serve as evidence. And possibly us and Laurie's pack along with it. He had detonated a weapons cache or the tunnel itself, intending to bury all the evidence under tons of earth and rock. The Wolf's pact was broken in the most brutal way possible, and now chaos was about to consume everyone. Knox's explosion had catastrophic consequences. It didn't just destroy the cartel tunnel entrance, it breached the roof of the old, unstable mine shaft, triggering a massive cave-in. The ground beneath our feet bucked and heaved, splitting open in fissures. Tons of rock and sand collapsed inward with a deafening roar, burying the tunnel, and likely everyone inside or nearby. Cartel gunmen, possibly some of Borden's men who had been trying to secure positions near the entrance. The shockwave threw us back, showering us with sand and small rocks. But the collapse wasn't the worst part. The explosion had breached not only the tunnel but also what was inside. The IR-40 cobalt sources stolen by Laurie. The immense energy release scattered the radioactive material. the air filled with invisible death, radioactive dust. And instantly the space around us ignited with an eerie, pulsing, bright blue light. Gamma flashes, Cherenkov radiation, occurring when high-energy particles travel through a medium, in this case the dust-laden air, faster than the speed of light in that medium. It looked like a hellish aurora borealis flaring directly overhead. This light had an immediate effect on the werewolves. Fenrir's trinity clicked into place instantly. The radiation index spiked to off-the-charts levels. Adrenaline from the blast and battle was maxed out. The full moon, though obscured by the storm, played its part. The pack's transformation became total and irreversible. Their bodies glowed even brighter. Muscles bulged to their limits, the rage in their eyes becoming absolute. They were no longer just wounded, cornered beasts. They were the embodiment of a radioactive nightmare. Their leader, Lowry, seemed to suffer the most. The blue glow surrounding him was almost blinding. He let out a roar filled with pain and hatred, but it wasn't directed at us. He turned towards the source of the explosion. There, on the edge of the collapsing chasm, stood a figure in dark tactical gear. Colonel Abram Knox. He clearly hadn't anticipated this effect from his detonation. His calculated plan had backfired, creating something far more horrifying. Lowry, ignoring his wounds, ignoring us, launched himself at his creator and betrayer. Two figures, the monstrous glowing werewolf and the man in armor, grappled in a death struggle on the edge of the gaping abyss, illuminated by the pulsing blue glare of the gamma flashes. My surviving team members and I were trapped. Our retreat was cut off by the cave-in. The sandstorm raged around us, carrying radioactive dust. Beside me on the sand lay Leo, his body shuddering from the antidote's reaction, his skin darkening. But he was alive, and it seemed, still human. The remaining werewolves from Lowry's pack, driven mad by radiation and pain, rampaged across the battlefield, attacking anything that moved, including each other. Major Borden and a couple of his men were desperately firing back, trying to fight their way towards us. The ground continued to tremble. New collapses widened the zone of destruction. Chunks of concrete and rebar from the old mine structure rained down. The entire complex was failing, threatening to bury us alive. I grabbed Leo under the arms, trying to drag him towards some cover, away from the chasm's edge and the epicenter of the radioactive contamination. Breathing became increasingly difficult. The air was thick with dust and ozone. The Geiger counter on Leo's belt screamed incessantly. We were caught in the heart of a man-made apocalypse under a full moon on the border between worlds, where science had birthed monsters and human cruelty threatened to destroy everyone. The night felt endless. The chaos of the collapse, the roar of the storm, the eerie blue glow, and the agony of the dying. It all blurred into one nightmarish kaleidoscope. I sheltered Leo and myself behind a large slab of concrete, firing intermittently at the maddened werewolves that darted through the dust and darkness. The fight between Lowry and Knox ended quickly and terribly. Both figures tumbled into the widening chasm, accompanied by the roar of a fresh collapse. Who had won was unclear and ultimately irrelevant. They were both consumed by the chaos they had unleashed. Gradually, the blue luminescence began to fade. Radiation levels were still dangerously high, but the peak of the gamma flashes had passed. Then, through the thinning sandstorm, the first ray of sunlight broke through. Dawn. The third dawn since the attack on Convoy 7R. And the sunlight had an immediate effect on the remaining werewolves. The lunar reaction, a key element of Fenrir's trinity, began to break down. Bestial fury gave way to agony. The creatures writhed on the ground, their glowing bodies dimming, their muscles seeming to deflate. Some tried to crawl away, seeking refuge from the hated light. Others simply lay twitching in their final convulsions. The sun, the source of life, was poison to them. Leo also reacted to the dawn, but differently. The violent convulsions stopped. The fever subsided, but he was on the edge. The cerium chloride antidote had done its job, halted the transformation, burned out the virus, but the price was horrific. The skin on his shoulder and side where the claws had torn him was blackened and necrotic. The muscle beneath was visible, dark, lifeless. He had survived the kickback, the agonizing purification, but had buried a part of his human flesh in the process. He was alive, he remained human. But the scars of this night, both physical and spiritual, would stay with him forever. He opened his eyes. His gaze was lucid, but filled with infinite weariness and pain. He looked down at his ruined arm, then at me. "Dana," he whispered through cracked lips. "Easy, Leo. It's over. We'll get out," I said, trying to inject a confidence I didn't feel into my voice. I helped him to his feet. He was weak. Every step was an effort. Major Borden and his 2 surviving patrolmen reached us. Their faces were gray with dust and the horror they'd witnessed. We exchanged silent nods. Words weren't necessary. We stumbled away from the ruins of the mine, away from the place where science and madness had intertwined in a deadly knot. We walked east, towards the rising sun. The air grew cleaner, though the Geiger counter still clicked anxiously. The desert around us was scarred by the storm and the explosion, but it was already beginning to stir back to life under the first rays of sunlight. And then I saw them. In the distance, silhouetted against the ascending sun, 3 dark figures ran across the desert floor. They moved fast, low to the ground, using the lingering shadows of night. Werewolves, survivors from Lowry's pack. The sun had weakened them, perhaps even partially reversed their transformation, but it hadn't killed them. They were escaping, heading deeper into the desert, into the Sierra Pinacate Mountains on the Mexican side, a wild, uninhabited volcanic range, a perfect refuge for those wishing to disappear. Lowry was dead, their radioactive power source destroyed, but three had survived. I watched them go, supporting the weakened Leo. My mission, by all formal metrics, was a failure. The cargo wasn't recovered. The threat wasn't fully neutralized. The secret of Project Fenrir hung in the air, ready to explode into scandal at any moment. But looking at the 3 retreating figures, I felt not only apprehension, but also a strange, inappropriate empathy. They were monsters, killers, but they were also victims. Victims of Knox's ambition, victims of the virus, victims of their own warped nature. Now they were free. Free in their wolf life. Vita lupi vita. I helped Leo take another step. The path out of this desert promised to be long. Washington met me with a cold, bureaucratic wall. My report on the events in Arizona, detailed and honest, was buried under lock and key, designated Top Secret File 0. The official story regarding the Convoy 7R incident stated, an attack by an unidentified terrorist group using unknown thermal weaponry. Attempt to seize radioactive materials thwarted by joint FBI and Border Patrol actions. All materials destroyed during the operation to prevent enemy acquisition. Personnel losses classified. No mention of Project Fenrir, of werewolves, of Colonel Knox. His name simply vanished from all accessible databases, as if he had never existed. Major Borden and his men received commendations for service and the strictest orders of non-disclosure. Leo Alvarez was confined to a secure DOE medical facility under the guise of treatment for effects of radiation exposure. In reality, he was in quarantine. His body was slowly recovering from the cerium injection, but the doctors offered no prognosis. The virus was suppressed, but not entirely eradicated. He remained a carrier. Constant monitoring, tests, biopsies. He had become a human test subject, a living reminder of Fenrir's failure. I visited him once a week. He held on. His mind remained sharp, but his eyes held the permanent shadow of the horror he'd endured, and the knowledge of the beast sleeping within. Sometimes, looking at the moon through his room window, he would clench his fists until his knuckles turned white. I was formally reinstated to my position in the Emergency Incidents Division, but I felt like I was under surveillance. My inquiries were blocked, access to certain databases restricted. I knew too much. The price of my silence was my career, my freedom. I had made copies of the key Fenrir files before submitting my report. They resided on an encrypted drive in a secure location. Blackmail? Insurance? I didn't know. More likely, a reminder to myself that the line between protecting the country and covering up its crimes can sometimes become unbearably thin. One evening, late, a message arrived on my secure channel from an old contact at the NSA who specialized in satellite data analysis. No text, just an attachment, a thermal image of a remote area in the Sierra Pinacate Mountains in Mexico, taken a few days prior. The image clearly showed heat signatures moving across the rugged terrain. Not 3. 6. 6 large, warm-blooded objects with abnormally high body temperatures, moving as an organized group. Attached was a short audio file, a recording of low-frequency noise captured by the satellite's high-sensitivity microphones. An analyzer recognized a repeating pattern within it, resembling a howl, a hybrid human-beast howl, and embedded in the file's metadata was a note, added manually by my contact: Lowry Prime signature active, +5 unknowns, Vita, Lupi, Vita. The story wasn't over. The pack had survived, and it was growing. Somewhere out there in the wild desert, the wolf life continued. And I didn't know if this was the beginning of a new war or just the echo of an old one, buried under the classification File 0. But I knew one thing. The night in Arizona had changed me forever. And facts could no longer be trusted blindly. Because sometimes the most terrifying monsters wear human faces, and in the eyes of a beast, you can see the distorted reflection of your own soul. End of Agent Kincaid's report recording.